purpose of this lesson is to discuss a brief introduction to the HTML5 canvas, to discuss what the canvas is and what it looks like, how to format the canvas, and how it can be used to add drawing capabilities to a website. The canvas is an HTML5 element. It is used to draw graphics on the fly. The canvas is a container element. It is a container for graphics. We will put graphics inside of it. However, it does not have any capabilities itself of drawing. It requires a third-party scripting language. Typically, JavaScript is what we would use. The drawing is actually done by the scripting language. The drawing is not done by the canvas. The canvas is just strictly a container. Now, the canvas does have some built-in methods for drawing paths, boxes, text, circles, and how to add images. Like I said, the canvas is a container object. It is similar to a div, which means that I can format it using a CSS. Now, it contains graphics that are drawn by a scripting language, but CSS cannot format the graphics. CSS can only format the container element itself. We are going to actually use the scripting language itself to format the graphics. This is going to be a brief introduction to the canvas. The actual lessons on creating the canvas would be an entire course by itself, so I'm just going to show you some of the basics. What I have done is I created a new file called canvas.html. It is a copy of my template, as usual. I added an entry into index.html, and I added the body style here for the font family to make it Arial, and I did create my canvas object already. So my canvas is just simply a container object. I gave it an ID called myCanvas, and it has a width and a height. And in my CSS, I told it that for this ID called myCanvas, it has a border, so that way you can see it. And this is what it actually would look like. Notice it is 400 pixels wide, and it is 200 pixels tall. There is nothing inside of it because remember, the canvas is just strictly a container object. Now, the purpose of this lesson is not to teach you JavaScript. However, I am going to have to use a little bit of JavaScript to be able to show an example to you of what the canvas can do. So what I'm going to do is I have this section called script here, and this is where my actual JavaScript code is going to go. The canvas items go here, and then the script is outside. So I'm going to start by declaring a couple of variables. And my first variable I'm going to call canvas ID. What I have to do is I have to identify what the actual canvas is on the page for JavaScript. So I'm going to say that the canvas ID is equal to document dot, and this is all JavaScript. This is out of what's called the document object model, or the DOM. And essentially what it means is that I can identify everything on the screen by ID. So my document is the entire browser window, and I can look in that document and I can get things called elements by ID. And what I'm looking for is my canvas. All right, so once I know what the canvas is, then what I want to do is I want to reference this canvas as a 2D object that I can actually add things to. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to call it C just for canvas, so that way I can make it shorter on me typing. And that is going to be equal to canvas ID dot get context. And in this case, it is a two-dimensional object, so I put 2D. And so what I've done now is I've just simply identified where my element is. I'm telling JavaScript to look for my canvas and create a variable called canvas ID, so that way JavaScript can reference that. And then look at the canvas ID and find out where it is in relation to the screen, and then we're going to put that location into this variable called C. So now what I can do is I can play with C. C has some methods that are available to me. For example, I want to create a fill. And a fill is going to allow me to fill in something as a rectangular area. So I want to make this, just give it a color. and actually that should be in quotes. And the next thing that I want to do is I want to take that color and I want to apply it to an area, which is going to be a rectangle. So I'm going to say c.fill rect. So this is a rectangle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it coordinates. Now up here, I told it to locate my canvas, figure out where it is on the screen, and it now knows that my canvas takes up this area. All right, now this point up here is location 0, 0. And if I go across here, this is 0, 400, so it's line 0, 400 across. And then we go down, so we have 200, 0, and then we have 400, 200. So what we're doing is we actually can reference the corners based on their coordinates. All right, so what I want to do is I want to fill in an area that's 150 pixels wide by 75 pixels tall, and I want it to start at 0, 0, 0, go 150 pixels to the right and 75 pixels down, and now when I refresh, I will get something like this. Now it's kind of gray, so let's make it stand out a little bit more. Let's go ahead and make it red. And there you go. So now I have an area that I filled in just simply by stating start at 0, 0, go 150 pixels to the right, 75 pixels down, and I can just fill it in. Instead of drawing a box, I could even draw a line. And so what I'm going to do is c.move to, and what I'm doing by doing this is telling the system, hey, move the cursor to this particular location. So I'm going to tell it to go to 0, 0. All right, so what that does is in relation to where the canvas is, it will move the cursor up here. So it's kind of like me taking my cursor up here and setting it there. All right, so then what I'm going to do is I want to tell it to draw a line to 200 pixels over and 100 pixels down. So the next line is going to be c.line to 200 pixels over, 100 pixels down. And then the last thing that I want to do is what's called stroke it, and which means it's actually going to apply a line to it. So I'm going to say c.stroke. And now when I refresh over here, now I have a line. Now notice I'm not doing anything with the canvas itself. I am strictly doing this through the JavaScript down here. JavaScript creates the drawing. The canvas just simply has the area for the drawing. Instead of playing with rectangles and lines, I could use circles. We also can do gradients, but something else that's kind of neat is I can actually include text over here. Now the thing is I'm going to include text, but it's actually going to draw the text out on the screen. So it's not strictly text, it will actually be a graphic that it creates. So I'm going to say c.font. This time I want to play with a font. Which one am I going to use? Well, I'm going to play with Arial, and I want it to be 40 pixels tall, and we're going to use Arial. And the next one is going to be c.fill text. So what it will do is it'll actually draw something on the screen. It's going to create the area of whatever text I create, and then what it will do is fill it in with this particular word. So I'm going to say hello world, which by the way is the first thing we do in most programming languages. And then where do I want to put it? So we're going to put it 20 pixels across and then 50 pixels down. Save this and refresh, and there we go. So now what we've done is we've simply added text, but this text is actually a graphic because we're allowing JavaScript to fill it in as a graphic. So instead of me actually drawing out each individual line, I let JavaScript trace the letters and it will actually draw it out as a graphic. All right, so that's the basis for the canvas itself. Remember, the canvas is just used to draw things, but I don't necessarily want to create a brand new script. What I can do is I can actually import one. And the nice thing is there are thousands of scripts available on the internet that you can freely download and use. Just make sure that you check that the license says that you're allowed to use it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to specify in my script declaration here that I want to actually call in a file. All right, so I have this file called canvas-drawing-tools.js. It's a JavaScript applet. So I want to include that on my document. So what I'm going to say here is the type is equal to text/JavaScript. This should look like when we called in our CSS files. And its source is going to be equal to scripts/ and it was called Canvas Drawing Tool. And there we go. So now what we're telling it is, I want you to not necessarily use what's typed in a script here, but use this file instead. All right, so what I have done is I added that JavaScript. I've also added a couple of other things on the page. I added a drop-down box so you can select the type of tool that you want to use. And using some CSS, we modify where these elements are on the page. But what I want to show to you is what the canvas is capable of doing. We have lines that we can play with. And now what I can do is I can click and drag. I can make a rectangle. And I can also freehand draw on the canvas. Now, like I said, all of this is a capability of JavaScript. It is not a capability of the canvas itself. The canvas is just strictly a container. So for me to get this capability, I either have to build this program myself, or I can go online and download one of the freely available applications. In this lesson, you learned about what the HTML5 canvas is, what the canvas looks like, how to add rectangles and lines to the canvas, how to add drawing capabilities through scripting, and that it is possible to make a drawing application in the canvas.